One potential stumbling block for democratic leadership is what I call the competence versus confidence paradox. In short, it refers to the tendency for leaders not to be the most competent or qualified or effective leaders, but actually the most confident of people, the people who believe they deserve leadership. And unfortunately, this is actually a very bad quality for leaders, with our tendency in the United States to be hyper-individualistic and to lionize confidence at all costs. We do tend to be very arrogant and foolhardy. Most of us could do with a good dose of reality and self-criticism and humility. I think this is only exacerbated by the way we talk about this paradox. It is often framed, what we really need to do is to encourage women to have more confidence, to step up and take leadership. And I know I'm not going to make any friends in saying this, but let me be blunt. In this situation, the stereotypically masculine tendency to be overconfident and to rush into positions of power and not to consider whether we are truly qualified for that position is the problem, not women's hesitancy to do so, not women doubting whether they are qualified for power. And if you don't agree, well, the current administration speaks for itself. That our problem is that we have leaders that are far too overconfident of their own expertise and abilities. I don't believe that the more stereotypically feminine way is always inferior. Humility and being hesitant to take power is actually something worth striving for, worth encouraging. And this is also one reason why women who are elected to office outperform men. Across the board, they get more bills passed, they're able to raise more funds, they deliver on promises more often, they're better connected with their constituents, they spend more time just actually doing the work of serving in office and attending legislative sessions and being present for votes. They introduce and author more bills, they get more bills passed. They tend to have higher approval ratings and are more likely to be reelected. And it is an effect of women facing more hurdles to power. Truth be told, women are not unreasonable for doubting whether they should run or not, because quite frankly, something that women are commonly told, and in my experience holds to be true, is that you have to work harder and be better and argue your point more thoroughly and expect that every that comes out of your mouth will be doubted. So you must be able to back up every single thing you say. That is my experience. And I know I am not alone in this. That is why women who run for office and who take leadership roles work that much harder. It isn't because women are naturally better leaders or that men are lazy. It's just that we are socialized to believe that we are not good enough. We have to try that much harder and work and deliver that much more just to be recognized, just be seen as worthy. And yes, some of it is that women are just less likely to think of themselves as leaders and see themselves in that position, and we're less likely to have our peers and friends recommend for us to be in that role. And of course, when we turn on TV and media, we're less likely to see ourselves in that role, both in reality, as 71% of political leadership roles are held by men worldwide, and when it comes to high office, it's much, much smaller. And I believe some of this might come from a bit of imposter syndrome. This is something I can definitely relate to myself, where I think one reason I argue my points so thoroughly and I back up my claims with citations and evidence is I am not accustomed to anyone just believing what I say. That is not my experience. Is we are so accustomed to having to be that much better and work that much harder and stand out that much more just to be seen on an equal level, if we're seen at all. Just to have the same role as a man who, through no fault of his own, doesn't think about this, doesn't have those doubts, because that's not how he was raised. That is not how society views him. There is a paradox on top of a paradox where the people who are most in need of hearing this message are also the least likely to absorb it. This is a very gendered issue. It is also related to all hierarchies of oppression, where we have a tendency to see white men as leaders and everybody else as unworthy. Or if they are in leadership, there is a tendency to assume that they are only there as tokens and could not possibly be qualified. Because when is the last time anyone has asked a white man if he was a diversity hire? When is the last time a white man was cast in a leading role in a movie and people called the choice political? This, of course, is a privilege that white, able-bodied, cishet men have, where their status as leaders and success is generally not questioned. They are not assumed to be given special treatment. They're generally not assumed to have slept their way to the top. The truth is that women rarely, if ever, sleep their way to the top. But what women do face is men who are in positions of power who are not above abusing that power to get sexual favors from women. And if they do this, that does not mean that the woman got the position by granting that favor. Not only are women victimized by sexual harassment and expectations of sexual favors in order to get leadership positions that men would be granted outright, but they also face the additional scrutiny of the assumption that they couldn't possibly be qualified, and this is the only reason that they could have gotten a position. And if this were common, we would see a deluge of unqualified women getting promotions and in high positions of leadership, which we do not. Actually, we see the opposite. And that is true in politics. Women face significant discrimination when it comes to high political office, especially. But really, this is something that occurs on every level. There was a study that did show that women do have advantage winning when it comes to local offices, specifically city council and school board. Now, the city council advantage was very small, almost within the realm of air. The school board advantage was more significant, and this is true, but I want to put it in a little perspective. Now, across the board, women who are elected to office are more effective and much more qualified than their male counterparts. And this goes back to that paradox where women are much less likely to see themselves as running for office. Women are much less likely to be told by peers and colleagues that they should run for office. The reason we say women have an advantage is only because of the assumption that men and women running for school board are on an equal playing field. And granted, this is an assumption we generally should make. We should not assume that one gender is more qualified or competent than the other. But in this case, we actually know that women running for office are more qualified than men running for office. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule, but in general, the average woman running for school board is going to be more qualified than the average man running for school board. Therefore, we should see that they win more often. Leadership is still seen as overwhelmingly a male or masculine trait. Of course, this is changing, and we are encouraging women to step up to leadership. And I know there are men who will feel a bit of anxiety in the pit of their stomach at me saying this, because one of the things that they've defined themselves as a man is as a strong leader. And if women take on that role, well, what does that leave them? There may even be men who are absolutely enraged by me saying this. I have to say, I'm sorry about your lack of confidence, but that is not my problem. And if me talking about facts challenges your confidence, then, I don't know, get good. That's not my problem. If you can't compete with women, perhaps you should adopt a definition of masculinity that doesn't involve male supremacy, because then you wouldn't be threatened by women in leadership. Maybe you should adopt a definition of masculinity that doesn't involve you having to be superior to all women on earth, which is impossible, and you know this. Treat women as equals, understand that gender stereotypes are bullshit and they hurt you as well as women, and you won't have this problem. None of this is natural. This is being manufactured by people who are trying to get men to blame women or diversity or anything but the wealthy and powerful for their economic woes. Because, if they become class conscious and start organizing unions and start demanding lower rent and higher wages, well, that's not something that the owning class and the powers that be want men focusing on. They would much rather get men to focus their hatred and vitriol and spite on women and focus on things that are not going to upset the profit margins and economic system. It's just the way that they're being framed is a way that's very useful for maintaining the status quo, and unfortunately very detrimental to women's equality and progressive change or even revolutionary change. And the problem with bringing this up is the men who need to hear this will not believe me, will not listen to me, and the men that don't need to listen, the men that should be in leadership because they do have a good head on their shoulders, they do value women as leaders, and they are feminists, they do seek gender equality, they're going to be the ones most likely to doubt if they should step up. Be conscious that there are men who are not as enlightened as you, and maybe focus on talking to them because they are a lot more likely to listen to you, and that might be where you actually can have the greatest effect. And I'm certainly not discouraging any men from leadership if my message resonates with you. Do you recognize that women face hurdles that you don't? You are the kind of person we need in leadership. And the people who aren't going to listen to this are not going to be discouraged from taking leadership roles by what I'm saying. On the left, we do tend to have a lot more diverse leadership because we are more egalitarian that way. It has always been the most marginalized that have led revolutionary movements, and for good reason. They just simply have a better perspective in a lot of ways due to their lived experience, and quite frankly, they have a lot less to lose from the overturning of the status quo. We need women who are qualified but might not think to step up as leaders in the Socialist Party as well. If you are interested in leadership in the Socialist Party, definitely reach out to me. Maybe I can tell you a little about it. The first step, of course, is joining the party and getting active, and it is so important to get active right now. If you're not happy with how things are and you're not a big fan of violence, we do have a blueprint to change things peacefully, democratically. So check us out. And a reminder that women have a lot less free time, they do have a lot less money, they are a lot less able to run for office and take leadership roles in a lot of ways. But in no way are women less able to be leaders. That's simply sexism, if anyone claims that. And that's true from the school board level to the highest levels of power. Women are just as able and just as competent as leaders as men are. And I'm not a big fan of, well, we need matriarchy because women don't start wars and blah, 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 blah. No, women are just as capable of being war criminals and class traitors as men, I promise you. I do not believe that having more diverse oppressors is the answer. But we do need more diverse leadership. That is true. But we need those leaders to be revolutionary socialists as well. And politics, even on the far left, is still very heavily slanted towards white men, especially in leadership. And I love my white male comrades, but we do need to encourage more women and more people of color and more queer people and more people of diverse backgrounds who are historically marginalized to step up to the leadership positions because they should be leading their struggle for liberation. It doesn't work any other way. We can't do it for them. As Deb said, and I am paraphrasing, if I am to be a Moses that could lead you out of slavery, that means you could be led back into slavery. I'm an advocate for socialism from below, and that means empowering people, encouraging people, making accommodations for people, understanding people who face marginalization and who are often barred or underrepresented in leadership positions, understanding how to get them in those positions, understanding what those stumbling blocks are. And I want to make clear, I do not really consider myself to be one of those people. I have so much privilege that I'm definitely on the other side of this in most cases. I do see some of the sexism, but by and large, everything else is so overwhelmingly in my favor that it really doesn't affect me. And that is one reason I talk about this so much, is I hope I can build an audience and get this message to resonate with people who might not otherwise think about these problems. Because I do believe most people on the far left want to be part of the solution. And what we have right now isn't a problem of anti-feminism like the far right does, but we do have a problem of complacency, where people don't have to be anti-feminists. They could just not take it seriously or, think of it as kind of a non-issue because they don't face it. But, especially if they don't have marginalized people in leadership, of course they might not see it. They're insulated from it. That's a problem. We need people who see these things firsthand. All these struggles are one. You can't separate one from the other. We can't have only liberation from class oppression. We need liberation from all forms of oppression. And if we don't, they will use that as leverage against us. They always have. And yes, I know no matter what I talk about, it pretty much always ends up being an argument for people joining the Socialist Party and fighting for intersectional socialist feminism. I sound like a broken record. I'm well aware. I could be wrong. And just because you don't agree with me, it doesn't mean you're a bigot. It doesn't mean that you're sexist or racist. If I'm wrong, I want to know. Because I see people agreeing with me, but they often don't really talk about it or they don't act on it. And I'm not sure if they don't know how, or they're worried they're going to do it wrong, or what. Or, it is kind of a hopeless time when people don't necessarily know how to organize or how to get active. I believe that people see this as important, but it is something you have to live every day. It should be part of every part of your life. So yes, if I'm wrong, please tell me why. Or if there's something stopping you from getting active, from joining, from organizing, let me know. Maybe we can work it out.